All right, hello everyone. My name is Sean Wilcox. Recently, one of the main topics of discussion in Lexington has been the letter sent from the African American and Africana Studies program to the president's office at the University of Kentucky, requesting changes to further improve race relations at the school. Joining me now is faculty member of the AAS program, Dr. Derrick White. Dr. White, how are you?
Good. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good, thank you. So first, I would like, if you can, just give some background info on yourself, and then background info on the program.
Yeah, I'm a professor of history in African American and Africana Studies here at the University of Kentucky. I arrived last year. I arrived last year at in the fall of 2019. I was hired, officially started this job, but I'm a native of Lexington. Grew up here, graduated from Bryan Station High School. Um, and so our program, though, in 2019 celebrated its 50th anniversary of Africana Studies at the University of Kentucky. And so it's been a longstanding, push by student activists going all the way back to into the late 1960s, who really pushed for the creation of this program. A number of faculty members have been here and instrumental to keeping it afloat, as well as its growth, including Professor George Wright, who's also a Lexington native, who has gone on to the Duke and eventually been the president of Prairie View A&M, who's been back recently at the university as a visiting professor, and now works in the president's office, as well as Gerald Smith, who's also a professor of history and also a Lexington native. And so we've done a number. Of course, our current chair, our chair last year was Anastasia Kerwood, who helped really kind of spearhead this letter, as well as Damaris Hill, who's our interim chair and current chair of Africana Studies. And so, my work is on race and sports. And so this has been, as well as Black Power and the creation of Black Studies. And so this is really the kind of the intersection of much of my own research and scholarship over the last 20 years in higher education.
See, that's why I wanted to have you on, is because you had that sports background, and that's what obviously I want to get into first. Is the last requested change you all made is to rename the title of the basketball arena Rupp Arena, of course. You all say the Adolph Rupp name has come to stand for racism and exclusion in UK athletics and alienates Black students, fans, and attendees. Excuse me. Just give us like the basis of the argument for renaming the basketball arena from Adolph Rupp's name, if you can.
Yeah, I mean, the short of it is, I mean, we have not, I mean, and we have like 10 points on this plan, and that's the 10th one. And for folks who grew up Black folks who grew up in and around this state, especially if they're, my age and older, they are very aware that the University of Kentucky has not always been a welcoming place for African Americans, right? Whether this goes all the way back to the kind of fight to even integrate the institution, but also the school has been hostile to students and students of color, but in particular Black students. And I think no person has exemplified this more than probably Adolph Rupp's legacy, in particular his last years at the University of Kentucky. And I've talked a little bit about this in other interviews as well. But the long and short of it is that there are a number of cases, at least reported cases by scholars and reporters and journalists, of Adolph Rupp using the N-word, right? This is a guy who, there's a lot of people on the other side who don't believe any of these things, but their beef is not with me, but with the journalists, who many of them are very respected journalists who reported these things. So I'm not. It's hard to say why so many different people would lie about these things, but I suspect that they're probably closer to true than false. As a historian, this is the way we evaluate evidence. One case we could probably dismiss, but there are 4 or 5 cases over Rupp's career. The other part of this is.
Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Yeah, go ahead.
No, the other part of this is that Rupp, if we evaluate Rupp in the moment that he is the head coach, especially in the mid to late 60s, Rupp has probably more opportunity than any other coach in the South, at least, to desegregate their team, right? The president of the university wants to desegregate the basketball team. The governor wants to desegregate the basketball team. And Rupp himself, like, offers and tries to recruit a number of players, right? Most famously, Wes Unseld and Butch Beard. But as I pointed out to others, is that it's not that he tried and failed. And that part of that trying is that he had a double standard for Black players than what he had for white players. And so one of the things that I did, I took my time over the weekend, to evaluate some of this, is that Rupp often did not offer many of the Black players who made All-State in the state of Kentucky, for example. And these players some of them went on to be pros. Some of them were racial pioneers at other institutions such as Eastern Kentucky, Western Kentucky, Kentucky Wesleyan, Murray State, Morehead State, signed many of these players who were all state. And that UK's inability is continual dragging of its feet on this issue, as civil rights was emerging and had emerged as the number one issue in America, is a symbol, right, of the kind of dragging of the feet of the institution that has kind of carried forward into this kind of hostile. And so folks who grew up in and around Lexington know for a fact that there were several white players who were on the roster who got scholarship offers from Rupp, were not as good as some of the Black players across the state, but some of them even in Lexington. One of the things that I figured out this weekend, that it doesn't look like he even offered anybody from Lexington Dunbar, right? The old segregated school here in Lexington. And so as a Bryan Station alum, Bobby Washington was our basketball coach for dozens of years, who went on to play, who left Dunbar, played at Eastern, made it to the NBA. And so when people are having these conversations, one of the things that strikes me as a historian is who they're asking about Rupp's racial stances, right? They're asking former players, former coaches, his colleagues. Those people, respected Rupp, like Rupp. And I'm not saying they have a reason to lie. I'm just saying that that should be balanced with other folks who are in and around the community, right? And so that's what I say. And so I think that not only is it just about the notion of, Rupp using the N-word, which is a signal of racial animus, but it's also the fact that we, as the flagship institution of the University of Kentucky, were the last major basketball program to desegregate in the 1960s. And so we should be embarrassed that Eastern and Western and Morehead and Murray and Kentucky Wesleyan all desegregated, when Rupp, at the time, we would regularly admit that Rupp was one of the top 2 or 3 or 4 coaches in the entire country, had the support of his president, had the support of the governor. It seems like someone in those circumstances should have been able to get it done. And so when one doesn't get it done, then what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to say when I watch other schools able to get it done? And so this is why we keep talking about that this has come to stand for racism as much as anything else, right? That Rupp is, this debate whether Rupp was or not racist, we're never going to be able to convince anybody, no matter how much evidence you push forward. But we cannot deny that his delay in desegregating his team comes to stand for the overarching slowness in desegregating the institution. And so as we move forward in the 21st century, all we're saying is that these issues going forward for a more diverse university, a more inclusive, diverse university, those things have to be reckoned with. And one of those ways is we recalibrate and rethink the way that Rupp's name on the outside of the building is positioned.
Okay, so I'm glad you mentioned former players earlier. I did want to bring up, so in an interview with my colleague Larry Ball yesterday, Tom Payne, he was the first African American to play for Adolph Rupp. He defended using Rupp's name in the title, and he also said, "I am one of the few left to play for the man." Excuse me. Those professors did not ask me about my experiences with him. Quote. Do you think it is reasonable to have asked Payne? How do you feel about his quote there?
I mean, we can ask him all the time. I'm a historian by training, right? So part of what I do is look at the evidence that presents itself. And so I'm not saying that anybody doesn't have this experience. I'm not saying that Tom Payne's experience was not, he didn't feel it was racist. I also know that as a former student athlete, what happens behind the scenes and what happens with the coach on the practice floor and on the field and on the court, those are two totally different things, right? And so one of the things that we have to understand is that Tom Paine is the end of that process, not the beginning. And so what I'm looking at is when I look at the totality of the events from 1961 or 1963, if we're being generous, right? 63, 64, all the way to Tom Paine signing, what I see is a ton of missteps, missed opportunities, and what looks to be purposefully dragging his feet. And one of the things that I talk about quite often is that it's not just about the individual. Like that racism is not just an individual question about RUP. That RUP is part of a racist system. If we agree that segregation is racism, as most people would agree, then the person who has the ability to end segregation through the recruitment of his basketball team is also a key figure, right? And so RUP's inability to do this, right? Like, is he or is he not? I mean, there's two questions. Is he or is he not one of the most powerful basketball coaches of his era? If he is, and he has support from the president and support for the governor, then the question we have to ask ourselves is, why does he continually to fail in 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, and then finally gain success in 69? Tom Paine only plays 1 year. There's no one in the following class in 71, and there's no one in 72. So at some point, I'm looking at 9 years. There's one player in 9 years. Now, in that same time, I watch Eastern Kentucky start and play 3 players in their first group of players that desegregate their team. Western Kentucky goes to the Final Four with 6 Black players on their roster, right? At some point, we have to hold them account that the context upon which RUP is operating in is changed. North Carolina's racial composition has changed, right? Duke has changed. Even Auburn had already desegregated its team before University of Kentucky. So even within the conference, in the Deep South, the places where RUP was like, how do I take Black players to Mississippi and Ole Miss and Starkville and all these places? Somehow Auburn had figured out a way to solve that question. And Auburn is not known for its basketball prowess in the 1960s. And so what is it about that? Was it about RUP's delay and delaying that it speaks to the continuation of segregation at the University of Kentucky in its most high profile sport? And let me add this other point. The second point is that Charlie Bradshaw, the football coach, was able to desegregate his football team in 1967. There's not a single building named for Charlie Bradshaw on the University of Kentucky's campus, right? And that, of course, has the tragic death of Greg Page and Nate Northington, but they recently put the statue of the 4 African-American players that became part of it. But when we think about, while we're honoring those 4 players and Nate Northington and Greg Page, we're honoring them. We have to also recognize that across campus on the gym, that they cannot find a Black player to join the basketball program. And so you have to see this. This is not just RUP is not just operating in a vacuum. He's operating in this larger context. Even on UK's campus, he's slow to be successful.
Okay, so what I want to ask you now, so I've seen people claim that you're trying to erase, you and your coworkers are trying to erase UK basketball history. You know, some saying that they might sell their season tickets. What do you say in response to them?
I mean, no one's going to exchange the history, right? Like no one, we are not making a claim that that RUP's national titles or his wins get erased. We're not saying that they should take the banner down that has his name inside of RUP Arena. That the history book will always say that he's was the head coach and that he was a pioneer in tactics. But it should also note that the record should also note that when the most important issue of his day regarding race and sports comes along, that he failed to accomplish that goal in a timely manner with all the variables needed to be successful.
Have any like former or current UK basketball players, or maybe just athletes in general at UK, come out in favor of this move? Do you all have you heard of any yet? Possibly.
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I just, like I said, I just started here this year. No, I no football. I mean, no basketball players have come out one way or the other. I mean, I suspect this is this is a historical question, right? This is
Yeah.
not, I think that there's a historical question at hand. There is a cultural and this is a cultural moment, right? This is a moment in which that we feel like a particular kind of realist, honest accounting and accountability for these kinds of for this kind of legacy, right? We're not just calling for the removal of Rupp, right? We're calling about the removal of Confederate sympathizers like William Breckinridge, right? That these are all part of this process, that if we are trying to move the university forward, then these are some of what we see. This is one of the steps of the 10 steps of improving faculty and hiring more faculty, moving them into to administration, improving staff. Just today, I saw in the Herald Leader that the University of Kentucky failed to meet its goals for minority business contracts, right? They talked about meeting 10%. They only met half of that. This is part of that process, right? This is not one data point. Rupp is just one data point in this larger narrative, right? And that he's just the most famous data point. And that at the same time, that I think that when we look at this information and we look at this data, that Rupp is he's not a cartoonish racist, right? I think part of the problem that UK fans have in particular is that they see racism as only emerging when someone is in the Klan or standing in the schoolhouse door like George Wallace. And that, as a historian of the Black experience, that racism and segregation was a complicated relationship, right? It was not that the people who maintained segregation also claimed that they liked Black people, or they knew some Black people. That was not an unusual requirement or an unusual expectation thing to occur in the South in the 1960s. And so, to me, Rupp had every advantage to take it to make Kentucky a leader, and he didn't. And in not doing so, he becomes a broader symbol of the kind of segregation and racial animus of the era.
Okay, so I do want to ask you one more question on Rupp, if I can. I do want to get to the other stuff. We confirmed obviously earlier that before I started recording this that none of President Capilouto, athletic director Mitch Barnhart, or UK head basketball coach Sean Calipari have said anything publicly. Why do you think they haven't responded publicly yet? And do you think they need to do you think they need to make a stance publicly?
I feel like President Capilouto will need to make a stance. Whether the AD and the head basketball coach will depend on how they choose to stand on this moral issue. I suspect that Mitch Barnhart, when asked by the press, will probably come out one way, make a statement one way or the other. I can't speak for the coach Calipari. I will say that in context of a basketball team that is predominantly Black, that Rupp's history is an important conversation to have moving forward, right? That I think that again, we're not erasing. There's no way that we can actually erase what he has already, the wins and losses that he's had, the kinds of things that he has done as a head coach. What we're saying is that the university and the city of Lexington should be much more wise in honoring him by naming the arena for him, because what that signals is that he signals a certain kind of progressive and idea that we in Lexington and we at the University of Kentucky like to project, but the reality and the accountability of those structures does not hold up to kind of historical scrutiny.
Okay, so I want to move on to the other points because I know that obviously, like you said, there's 10 of them, so they're all equally important. As you mentioned Black representation earlier, you all said you want 15% at least of the faculty to be African American, which is the equivalent of the Black population in Lexington. And then you all put that, and I'm reading from my notes, only 3.7% of the university faculty as of right now is Black. 4.5% leadership positions, only one at the most senior level administration, and only two department chairs. And then you all say, quote, low numbers of Black faculty in departments across the university causes isolation among Black faculty and hurts retention efforts. Do you feel isolated at UK? Have you had that feeling before? And do you know any other African American faculty that have that feeling?
Oh yeah, I mean, so my personal situation is very different than almost every faculty member here at the University of Kentucky, Black faculty member here at the University of Kentucky. I'm from Lexington, so my parents live here, all my family lives here. I was born and raised here, multiple generations, and so my relationship to Lexington is my roots are deep in this town. But having had a number of other jobs in this country, including in places that were, less diverse than UK, that yes, it being a Black faculty member on many campuses can be, and in many departments, can be a lonely experience, right? And I think that part of this is that the way in which universities function, the way that Lexington functions with a certain kind of benign, a certain kind of niceties, a veneer of niceness, but also hidden underneath that veneer is a kind of level of racial animosity that often merges and bubbles to the surface that makes people who are not from here and from places like this, it can be very hostile into the way their experiences are. When you combine that to the fact that the leadership of most departments are white men, women, who may not understand or may not be sympathetic to your position and your experience, it can be a very lonely place in university, right? And so I think that's a very real experience for faculty of color. It is not necessarily my personal experience because, as I said, I grew up here. I have family here, friends and family that go back, for generations in this town, and so, I have a different experience, but I've had experiences in academia with similar kinds of numbers where you felt very isolated in a similar kind of place.
Okay, so you also mentioned Confederate statues earlier. You all request that the removal of all those. Specifically, I remember William C.P. Breckinridge. Do those statues at UK, do they make you feel unheard, like the Confederate names and such?
Well, I just think that one of the things that we have to really acknowledge, right, that like the Confederacy is and Confederate sympathizers and people like Breckinridge and others, and this is going on across the country at every campus, a lot of campuses in the South, but including some campuses in the North, that we just have to have a honest reckoning that the Confederacy was about maintaining slavery, and that we as an institution of higher education should not be supporting that position through public artwork, whether it be statues, names on buildings, that et cetera. If we're going to be a diverse and inclusive institution, as the president repeatedly says that that's what we're supposed to be, and we're striving to be better at in the 21st century.
Okay, so another thing I want to get to related. So you all are requesting more consequences for racial action, saying too many verbal and physical attacks on Black students, faculty, and staff occur without consequences or for perpetrators. Have you been the victim of a racist attack at UK, and do you know many that have? How did UK respond?
So I just started in the fall, and I didn't arrive until January. So I have not been the personal victim of any of these particular kinds of accounts, but I can just speak of this more broadly, right? That one of the things that universities have a difficult time with is how do we deal with racial harassment? What are the accountability structures for racial harassment on campus for students of color? And so when we think about this in terms of gender, for instance, like if you have gender harassment, whether it's from students or from faculty or staff or anywhere else on campus, there is a Title IX office that you can bring these issues forward to, that there's a certain kind of investigative nature in which these events, this event can be investigated and dealt with. But there are not similar kind of, there's not a similar kind of office in terms of racial harassment, right? And physical harassment, like if someone tries to beat you up, you can call the police. But if someone calls me the N-word in classroom, I have no recourse. There's no recourse for me, because students in theory, and at least by the way most universities operate and their understanding of First Amendment, says that they have this as a First Amendment right to use this particular kind of language. And so, this of course, when you feel like the university as a faculty member of color, that if you are being harassed, or a student of color, you feel like you're being harassed by fellow students, or you feel like you're being racially harassed by staff and faculty, then you have no recourse. Then this, of course, again, given the small numbers of Black faculty, given the small numbers of Black faculty in administration, Black and brown faculty in administration, there's no real recourse for you to do this. And so then you begin to leave. And this, of course, hurts your retention numbers, right? And so great faculty who feel that they're great contributors to our community, to our university, but feel that they have not gotten any support in particular kind of hostile situations, they leave. When it comes to recruiting Black students, right, 2 or 3 years ago, we had the lowest number of Black students entering in UK in over a decade, right? And part of that is that Black students are looking at the experience that other Black students are having at the University of Kentucky and deciding that they just do not want to have that experience in their college career, right? And so they're attending other universities, whether it be the University of Louisville, or they're leaving the state. So we're losing quality students that can contribute to our broader kind of student body, as well as the academic engagement of the university.
Okay, so last question, then I'll let you go. Okay, so in the letter, you all recommend the suspension of the relationship between UK and local law enforcement, along with ICE, of course. Do you worry that the suspension of the relationship with the local law enforcement will lead to possibly more gun violence, like we've seen at schools, unfortunately, in the past?
No, I don't think there's any data that supports that. I think one of the things that we see is that across the country, this national conversation about policing has pointed out the fact that Black and brown folks are over policed, whether it's on college campuses or whether it's in schools across America or in the communities. And so the impetus for this claim, both in terms of the local police force and ICE, is that we see this as an institution that functions to maintain white supremacy in the country, right? That is the sharp end of the stick, and that the university could be well within its rights to reduce the relationship between local law enforcement and still have a very productive, highly engaged student body that is able to take on tough issues and debate them in a very civil and civilized manner. But at the same time, Black students don't want to feel like they're coming back to their room and being questioned whether or not they belong on campus, right? And I think that is a common experience for faculty, staff, and students on UK's campus and many others.
Okay, well, I guess that is pretty much all I wanted to ask you. I really appreciate you doing this, Mr. White. I think it's important that we all hear your perspective as well as your coworkers. I hope you stay safe, obviously, through this pandemic, and hopefully we can get some way back to normal. Whenever we go back to campus, maybe one day I'll see you on campus. You never know. I don't know how it's going to work, but we'll get there sometime. Thank you.
I know the big question mark is COVID. So yeah, stay safe and make sure you wear a mask.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
No problem.